Hey, truth be told, Captain Ron here, and when I say this, I mean it. One of my very, very honestly favorite guests, one of my favorite people at the whole Contact in the Desert thing, Dr. Robert Schoch is with us again. He's been on our show before, but we really appreciate it. I didn't get to meet him in person. Have him live here with me is very exciting. I really love this opportunity. Before we get into all your wonderful work, I really just want to take a minute. We know that John Anthony West passed this year, and I know obviously he was a colleague of yours. Maybe you could say a few words about him. It'd be really
Oh
great.
gosh, it's so difficult to know what to say about him. He and I knew each other. We worked together. Our lives were entwined really for the last 3 decades, the better part of the last 3 decades. He passed away. Here we are in Contact in the Desert 2018, and was it June 1st today,
Yep.
and he passed away just a few months ago. He passed away February 6th of this year. And of course, he was someone who had participated in Contact in the Desert in the past, and it's just a really sad loss, because he's the one that, as he liked to say, he ruined my life by getting me involved initially with the Sphinx research, and then what that has blossomed from there, and the whole business of earlier civilization before civilization. But I wouldn't be here today talking about these things. As he would like to say, I'd be off in my own world, studying some obscure aspect of geology if it hadn't been for him.
There's another part of his legacy.
Yeah.
That's a part of his legacy, so he got you into this, and that's wonderful.
It really is, and I give him a lot of credit.
And together you guys came up with some amazing things. Why don't you just give a quick recap then? I know about what you've talked about with the Sphinx, because mainstream archaeology has had long held a wrong view of the age of the Sphinx, and that's basically
what it comes down to. Mainstream archaeology considers the Sphinx to be 2500 BC, and what we did, or what I want to think of it as we're still doing it, although he's passed, we are making the case based on solid evidence that the Sphinx, the origins of the Sphinx, go back to a much more remote period. And I would put it now at about 10,000 BC, roughly, about 12,000 years ago, which is incredible and amazing no matter how you cut it. But for the mainstream archaeologists, the mainstream Egyptologists, it's absolutely ridiculous from their point of view, because it goes against their paradigm. It goes against everything they believe.
This bothers me so much. I don't think at this point you're making the case, Doctor. You guys have made the case.
We've made the case.
You were on our show, and I said, look, this is now proven fact.
It is.
You guys have the scientific data. There's no mumbo-jumbo nonsense in here. You've done such deep drill downs. We now have the answer. I don't know why we can't just go to the science community and say, here's the evidence, here's the answer.
No, I agree with you.
Let's accept it.
I agree with you. And just for the audience that doesn't know about, the case is multi-pronged. What is probably the most easily envisioned and the most easily understood is the weathering and erosion on the Sphinx, that you have precipitation-induced, as I call it, or to put it bluntly, rainfall on the Sphinx, incredible, massive rainfall that eroded it away a meter or more in places. This had to be repaired in the Old Kingdom times 4,000 plus years ago. It wasn't caused at that time, because at that time it was Sahara Desert. You don't have massive precipitation and rainfall and runoff.
And we can measure this,
prove it. And you can prove that. Right. And we know geologically how you've had climate changes over the past, and we now know that at the end of the last ice age, 9,700 BC, you had massive rainfall because you had a dramatic warming of the temperatures, and we've now figured out that that was due to a major solar outburst that melted glaciers, put incredible amount of water into the atmosphere, melted the glaciers, evaporated lakes, etc. You load the atmosphere full of water. It can only hold so much. It comes down as incredible precipitation, flash floods all over the place around the world. We have stories of biblical floods. We see that on the Sphinx. So that is the most obvious in many ways, the evidence for it. But there's also lots of other pieces of evidence. For instance, with John Anthony West, Thomas DeBecke, and I, we did seismic studies in the early 1990s around the Sphinx. We could see different levels, different degrees of weathering, subsurface weathering, mineralogical changes. This occurs on a regular basis once the rock is exposed, so you can calibrate how long this takes. And when
So you can actually measure
you
specifically
can measure
how much it's moved.
Exactly, and we're talking meters worth of subsurface mineralogical changes since it was exposed. And when you calibrate this, it goes back to the same very, very remote period. And we found, of course, a chamber under the Sphinx, which we're very excited about. I've been excited about for the last 25 plus years, and we'll get into it some
And that
point.
matches with the famous Edgar Casey
That
thing
matches
about
with
under
the
the right
famous
paw,
Edgar Casey's, exactly.
all the records of the world. yeah.
Exactly, and then we have the Sphinx Temple, which was constructed at the same time as the Sphinx, and we have very strong evidence, not just strong evidence, in undoubted evidence that this was reworked and reused by the dynastic Egyptians in the Old Kingdom, but they weren't building it originally. They were venerating it and restoring a much older structure. We see the same thing elsewhere in Egypt. And then I'll jump quickly to another major piece of evidence, which West
Geological.
loved, geological evidence, and that is Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, which was covered over 10,000 plus years ago, and the actual site can be dated geologically by stratigraphy, radiocarbon, etc., to a good 12,000 plus years ago. Because they asked us, the Egyptologists said, well, if the Sphinx goes back so far, where is there other evidence? And as John
Göbekli
Anthony
Tepe.
West liked to say, there we have smoking gun evidence, because it's undoubted. Excavated by the late Klaus Schmidt of the German Archaeological Institute. No doubt, no questions. This is not any kind of fooling around. So that tying back
Yeah, that
with
they
the
accept.
Sphinx.
Everybody accepts that.
But then they try to downplay it, and they don't see the implications, and they don't see how it ties back. So we've got all this evidence for the Sphinx. The problem with the Sphinx is it's a little bit muddier. Why? Because it wasn't buried and sealed up for 10,000 years, and it was reused and reused again. The head was recarved. But then they said, oh, there's no record of the Sphinx going back to an earlier period among the ancient Egyptians. Now we have evidence for that, because with a new publication, a new discovery by Dr. Manu Saifzadeh, a colleague of mine, and he and I and Robert Bouval have published this in a peer-reviewed journal. We now know that there are inscriptions that discuss the Sphinx, but it's not the Sphinx as we know
They just
it.
don't call it by that name? Or?
It's Mehit.
Ah.
It's called Mehit, and Mehit was a lioness, a goddess in the form of a lion. And not only was she in the goddess in the form of a lion, but she is depicted literally with this bent rod coming out of her back. It's not just a bent rod, it's a key. It's literally the representation of a key at that time, and she is called the guardian of the archives of Mehit, or the person who gets the title is the guardian of the archives of Mehit, or the Royal Library, the Archive, the Hall of Records, whatever you want to call it. Ties back with
Edgar Casey again?
Edgar Casey
Yep.
and that chamber under the Sphinx. And get this is really important. This title was used by a number of individuals in earliest dynastic Egypt going back 500 or more years before the supposed carving of the Sphinx, according to the standard Egyptologists. So now we have written evidence going back to the earliest hieroglyphs that yes, the Sphinx was there, and they refer to the Sphinx as a guardian of an archive. Plus, you can see in the context that they refer to the Sphinx, or what we now call the Sphinx, it was the lioness Mehit, a female lion, was very ancient at that time.
I
in
love how it
3000
syncs
BC.
up. When that much stuff syncs up, it's
Oh,
gotta
it's
come on.
undoubted.
And
I
that's
mean,
another
it's,
thing, right? Your position is obviously this was originally a lion.
Yeah, it was originally a lion, and for a long time we were thinking a male lion. Why? Because on the equinox, 10,000 or so BC, it faces Leo. But no, it's a female lion. You could even think of it maybe as the male-female, the duality or the consorts. You know, the male.
And Bouval's on board with that,
He's
right?
absolutely
Yeah.
on board with that. I mean, Bouval is so much on board with it that he and I co-authored a book together that came out in 2017 called Origins of the Sphinx, where I put together and dovetail all of the geological data. He puts together and dovetails all the archaeoastrological
Which
data,
supports the-
archaeoastronomical data, I should say, but
Yep.
astrology plays in there too. But the
And it all matches up.
it all matches up. It all points back to this earlier period of about 10,000 to 11,000 BC, which was Zep-Tepi, the first time, according to the dynastic Egyptians, because they themselves talked about this earlier, I call it the cycle of civilization, an earlier cycle of civilization that goes back to that remote period, a time when there wasn't supposed to be civilization according to the standard Egyptologists, according to the standard archaeologists.
Well, standard archaeologists support Göbekli Tepe now.
But they do. But you know
So
what they do?
now-
They support it. They say, oh, yes, it's real. But then I've seen it so many times, both speaking to them personally and also on shows and whatnot, they try to downplay it. They say, well, oh, yeah, okay, we
one-off.
can't deny it, but it's a one-off. It's not that important. Oh, it's not really that sophisticated. Okay, you try to erect, 15-foot or
Ton,
more
yeah.
pillars weighing
15 tons or whatever.
15 tons, beautifully carved, barely set into the bedrock, but balanced perfectly. I mean, this is a real engineer. Don't tell me there's not some real sophistication there.
No doubt. Here's the big question. What is so wrong with the Sphinx being 12,000 years old?
Oh, I think everything's right about it. But the thing is,
Why
I
are
know
we
what
afraid
you're
of this?
saying. Why am I getting criticized for this?
Right.
Because somehow, people have so many vested interests in things. They've built their career a certain way. They've written the books. They've written the textbooks. They've written their doctoral dissertations. People don't like being proved wrong. They don't like to think differently. Furthermore, getting back to John Anthony West, he would say, and I agree with him to a great extent, we have in our society today the notion that things only improve, they only get better. It's a one-way progress. He used to talk about what he called the church of progress, that this is a secular church based on the concept that things only get better and better
That's very
and
true.
better.
Every iPhone gets,
That's right, that's
yeah.
right. So to say that you have a sophisticated civilization
And
at
you dip back
10,000, and then
down,
you
and then-
dip back
yeah.
down and then come back up, that doesn't sit well with a lot of people. That goes against everything they believe. And then furthermore, I'm adding to it, and West loved this, and it was late in his, unfortunately, life, but I believe that I've now, with the work of colleagues and my wife, actually, Katie, who's contributed a lot to it, we figured out the solution to what happened. There was this demise of sophisticated civilization at the end of the last ice age. At the end of the last ice age, we'd have this incredible warming, global warming. What causes that? It was a major solar outburst we already mentioned. So this caused devastation around the world. It brought this early cycle of civilization to its knees. It went into a free fall demise. It killed off large populations of humans. Other people were able to go into shelters underground, into caves, and we see this around the world, traditions of going underground and then re-emerging later. So we went into this devastating period, and what I now call SIDA, solar-induced dark age, that lasted for a good 6,000 or so years before civilization re-emerges. But this is not what the standard archaeologist and the standard person in the street wants to hear, because it actually, whether they think about consciously or not, it has, I'm suggesting this, it has implications for our society today. If that could happen back then, it could happen to us.
That's interesting.
And people don't want to think about that. How many people think about the future? How many people, the more than a few years ahead of time? How many people want to hear that things might not be so rosy as they want them to believe? I have literally people say to me, don't tell me about that.
I'm telling you, Doc, this is the one thing that bothers me more than many of these things. Like we've all trying to get the Orion Belt proven. It's like, I understand that we don't want to change and we have these fears. That makes sense to me. But once somebody comes, oh, by the way, here's the scientific data. Well, then we have to change our perspective. We mentioned it earlier today. We were talking about how Tony and I visited the Wilson Observatory, and that was 100 years ago they built that. And before that, they thought that the entire universe was just our galaxy because we could only see that
exactly.
far. So they thought that was everything.
Yeah.
Then they built a bigger telescope and went, wait a minute, this is just our galaxy. There's actually thousands of galaxies in the big universe. So we changed our perspective. Well, we thought the Sphinx was 2500 BC. You did a little research, 35 years worth of little research.
Yeah.
You've proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that it's really more around 10,000 BC. That's the answer.
Yeah, I agree. And to me, it's always been a case, I'm not stealing Egypt from the Egyptians because I've been accused of that. I've been accused of all kinds of things. To me, we are extending what we have to say. We're extending history. We're learning more. We're
I see their position. They want
evidence.
to own that we did that. I understand that.
Yeah.
But the rest of the world should come on board.
Yeah.
Scientific fact. What happened to science?
Well, okay, science arguably is objective and should just follow the evidence, but science is followed by scientists. Scientists are real people. They have feelings, they have emotions, they have vested interests, they have grants, they have,
You are so nice and so patient and so understanding with, well, it's going to take a while. And you said as they die off, it'll become the norm. I think that's horseshit. We should, today, I already know the answer. Give me the guy. I'll call him. I'll straighten him out. Here's the book. That's the answer. I'm serious. It really does bother me. These are the things because I fight with people that are skeptics on these things. And this is one, well, we've already got the answer. And what's wrong with it?
No, I agree with
It's
you.
not, you
On the
didn't
one
say an
hand,
alien
there's
came here
nothing-
and built it.
No, I'm not
You're
saying
saying
anything like that.
it was built at this date.
Yeah, I'm
what,
saying.
what is the harm
and you know,
in
if you
this?
think about people back then, even the how should I say, the classic conventional scholars, anthropologists, paleontologists, etc., 10,000, 12,000, 15,000, 20,000 years ago, it's not that long ago geologically.
Right.
The people then were like the people now. We're smart people, at least people think they're smart. They were smart back then. There's no reason they couldn't have been doing these things. It's just a different perspective, and people don't like their worldviews changing.
This is the one that really just bothers me. Now, okay, so why don't you give us the age? Okay, do you have an age that you feel that the Great Pyramid was built in relation to?
The Great Pyramid is much more complicated because just like the Sphinx, in my assessment, it was built and rebuilt, and what we're seeing now is a structure that is a composite. So there are lots of dynastic Egyptian aspects to the Great Pyramid. There's no doubt that when you look at the Great Pyramid now, you are looking at something that the dynastic Egyptians looked at more or less, although it's now been stripped of its casing stones, etc. But with that being said, the origins of the Great Pyramid, I believe, go back to the same early period. That's confirmed with my colleague again, Robert Bouval's.
Graham
Orion.
Hancock's on board with that, with the Orion thing, with
Well,
Bouval?
but that's Robert Bouval.
Well, Bouval, I thought Graham Hancock was part
Well,
of that.
he's done some stuff with Bouval, but I want to give credit where credit is due. Bouval came up with that, the Orion correlation. Bouval's the one.
And he announced last year at Contact that he finally got the scientific to give him credit for that.
Oh
that they
yeah,
accepted
and
it
he's finally gotten
After
credit
years
for
and years
that.
and
Exactly.
years. Yeah.
And what that's doing is that's pointing to again the same early time period. Now Robert Bouval, and I would agree with him on this, would say that what you see today, as far as the Great Pyramid, the ultimate completed pyramid that we see today, is not 10,000 BC, but, and this is me speaking now because I go a bit further maybe than Robert Bouval, is that the origins of the Great Pyramid go back to that earlier period. It's not just that they had a ground plan that they were planning to build something there in the far distant future, or that in 2500 BC they were memorializing 10,000 BC. I don't believe that. I
You're
believe
saying it was done.
there was really something there. Now, what was there? There was a sacred mound, what I would call the sacred mound, which to this day is under the Great Pyramid. There was a subterranean chamber. I think that goes back to that earlier period. I think some of the blocks and superstructure go back to that earlier period, but I do also think that was probably restored at a later time. But we don't really know how much and what, and no matter how you look at, even if you date to 2500 BC or 2550 BC or 2600 BC, depending on...
You think that can be an accurate dating?
No, I'm saying even if you do.
Yeah.
It's an incredible structure. How were they doing it then?
Oh, exactly. If you dated it to 200 years ago, I'd say it's amazing,
Exactly.
right?
It's amazing no matter how you date it. So you've got a couple of different things here. Just to push it back in time or push it forward in time doesn't explain it as far as how was this constructed and how was it so beautifully aligned. There's no good indication that the ancient dynastic Egyptians that we know could construct something like that. So there's a lot of mystery about the Great Pyramid.
I get angry every time
but
I
I do
hear
think its origins go back to a much earlier
to 10,000
period.
BC-ish.
Yeah.
And see, once I feel that, and I've heard that from some other people, it angers me every time I'm watching something on the History Channel and they say 2500 BC as the date, or they say people don't know that the Sphinx was carved out of where they think it was put there by blocks.
Oh yeah,
but that's not true.
That's not true.
Why don't you tell our audience how it was
No,
really done?
no. It was carved out of the solid bedrock. Initially,
That's right.
you had what became the head was seen above ground level. That was carved into some kind of head. We
Probably
now
a lion.
a lioness,
Yes.
lioness, and then to carve the body, they actually cut down into the bedrock. And so when you go to Egypt and you look at the Sphinx, and I hope people will come with me to Egypt if they have a chance. You go and you see the Sphinx, you actually look down into what's known as the Sphinx enclosure. Sometimes they call it the quarry. And that they had to cut down to bedrock to free up the body. So it's based on the body, the erosion and weathering on the body, but even more the walls of the Sphinx enclosure that I've been able to analyze because that's been preserved. And furthermore, when they were carving out the Sphinx, they didn't just chip away the rock and shovel out basketful. They cut out huge blocks of limestone weighing tens of tons, 50 or more tons, some of them, maybe close to 100 tons for some of the bigger ones. They moved those forward to the east, built what is now known as the Sphinx Temple and the Valley Temple, which were later restored by the dynastic Egyptians, just as I suggest that the we'll call it the proto-Great Pyramid and the proto-Second Pyramid, whatever was there, were later reused and restored. So you have a very complex history on the plateau of older structures being reappropriated, reused, and something that I think...
Which happens all over the world. We see that in Baalbek. We see that everywhere, over and over.
Yeah. But you have dynastic Egypt, which is really building on the legacy of a much earlier civilization.
I don't know why we can't just accept this. So you make an excellent point that no one's ever said to me before, which is it doesn't matter if it was 2,500. What if it was 500 years ago? It's still really incredible to build this.
Yeah.
Now, I'll turn that on its head. What if it was really, which we think it is, 10,000 BC? So now we're saying 12,000 years ago, people are eating grubs, living in caves.
Yeah, but
then they came out and they built the pyramid.
But that's a classic. That's a classic argument that they couldn't do it, and they were just They were just hunter gatherers, quote unquote. But what I'm suggesting is that is a total misconception. They were much more sophisticated, much more advanced at an earlier period. And people say, well, where's the evidence? Well, look at the evidence. There it is.
It's right there.
There it is. It's right there.
Well, think about today. If there was a catastrophe, I was telling Tony the other day, I can't put lead in a pencil. If there was a catastrophe today, how could we get iPhones?
Oh
again?
yeah. That's the thing. I mean, that's I think a good way for people to think about it. Think about a catastrophe today. Think about solar outbursts today. Destroy all our technology. Incinerate everything that can be incinerated. What's going to remain? A few big stone structures, but we don't build in big stone structures anymore.
Right.
Maybe a few concrete blocks with the logo of some, I don't know, sports company or something on it, and then people come in to excavate 12,000 years from now.
These guys are morons.
They're not going to know what they're looking at, and they won't know how to interpret it, and they won't put together the society and the civilization that we are aware of.
And why is this so obvious to you and I having this simple conversation, and yet people don't see it this way? It drives me crazy.
Yeah.
I really don't, because to me this is very factual based, and it's okay, and it seems very plausible. You don't have to have some big stretch to think that technology could be lost.
No, no. In fact, you don't need to stretch at all,
Right.
because we have real cases of that. We have the fall of the Roman Empire, as people like to call it, and the 5th century A.D., so about 1,500, 1,600 years ago, and we know that a lot of sophisticated technology was lost. You just look at the art, the architecture, etc., from, say, 200 A.D. to 800 A.D., and what's happening there.
Exactly. You also hear that, I've heard from ancient China even, that they've
yeah.
found stuff that they rediscovered that they had 1,000 years before.
Yeah, so you can.
So why couldn't that happen for 10,000 years? It's
Yeah,
even more
exactly.
plausible given more time.
We actually, this is interesting. I mean, it's trivial, one could say, but it's interesting. I remember talking to a historian once about some of the big mills in the late 18th, early 19th century, and they had these technologies of these big gears and these big belts that they made out of leather, and they had some kind of glue that they could glue them together so that they wouldn't break when they were going at high speeds. And he says to me, no one can reconstruct that glue. They lost the formula for that glue, and in all our
There you go.
yeah, in all our intelligence and sophistication, no one's able to figure out how they did this, and that we're only talking 200
Glue.
or less years ago.
And glue. We're
Yeah,
not
because
talking about building-
because people stopped using that technology, they went on to other technologies, and so a lot of these things weren't written down. They were passed down orally. They were passed down from, a master to apprentice.
Right, that's another good
And
point.
when you stop that tradition,
What about some of these other, I don't know if you look at some of the other structures, such as Baalbek or Ollantaytambo in South America. The age of these, what do you think Baalbek's dating at? Because
I don't know.
I mean, but that seems too. There's no way they built on top of those
I know they built on
stones.
top in Roman and classical times. There's
Yeah.
something weird going on.
There
there.
is something weird going on.
But those are all questions. I mean, all these things. Now, I am someone, and I'll warn you, I'm someone that I don't like to talk too much about things I haven't really had a chance to study and look at the evidence carefully.
Sure.
So there are places I'm looking at now, but I'm not ready to talk about them. But I
Gotcha.
think that's only fair.
Absolutely.
But I think so many of these, ultimately, my prediction is it's all falling into place. That we have lots of evidence around the world of this earlier
Well, the fact that you guys have
cycle.
already sort of proven the Sphinx Age and virtually the Pyramid Age, I mean, I think that's, once that gets accepted, that's a big first step.
Yeah.
Because even as a layperson, I can look at a picture of Baalbek and go, 1,200 tons.
Oh, yeah.
That just doesn't make
Once you have the
sense.
paradigm, once you have the new
Yeah.
view, other things start to fall into place.
So you're so patient about letting this happen over time, and hopefully in my lifetime we'll get to the bottom of some of these things.
Hopefully.
Gosh. This poor guy, he had to give a lecture, then he had to sit here with me and go over all this nonsense. I'm going to go ahead and let you go,
Well, thank
but I
you.
really
It's
appreciate
been-
you coming in.
It's been great. I appreciate the interview.
Folks, this is exactly the real age. Look at his books. This is the facts. This is changing the dynamic and the paradigm of the scientific beliefs of this
exactly.
now. Right.
Can I put it in my website?
Huh? Please.
Yes.
Please.
Okay. So if you want more information, go to www.robertschoch.com, and it's spelled SCHOCH. So www.robertschoch, and Schoch is SCHOCH, all one word there, .com.
And tell us about that book, the Sphinx.
Oh, well, the couple of books that, if you're interested in pursuing this further, for the overall picture and the background, I suggest my book, Forgotten Civilization, subtitled The Role of Solar Outbursts in Our Past and Future. So Forgotten Civilization, and there's links from my website. And then for the Sphinx specifically, go to Origins of the Sphinx, the book I co-authored more recently with Robert Bouval, and that will give you a lot of specifics on the Sphinx. And furthermore, if you go to the website, you'll find a link to the MetHit article that I was mentioning, and you can download that for free. And so a lot of good reading material.
There is. I've
Get
been
the
to your
books.
website.
Yeah, very good.
No doubt. Well, thanks very much,
Oh,
Doctor.
thank you.
Captain Ron signing off here on behalf of Tony Sweet and myself, and it was a real honor to have Dr. Schoch with us again. And it's truth be told, we'll see you later.